Much of the buzz about the San Diego Chargers heading into the 2015 NFL Draft was twofold. One, was this team getting ready to trade Philip Rivers? Is Philip Rivers going to be with the organization long term? Is this a team that's preparing themselves for a move to Los Angeles? And then number two, is this a team that was sold enough on Marcus Mariota to do what would be necessary to try and move up to number two and package up Philip Rivers maybe to the Titans to go get a guy like Marcus Mariota? That was a lot of the draft talk about the Chargers heading into this draft, and understandably so, because this organization in many ways is at a bit of a crossroads. I mean, they really are. You're talking about a Philip Rivers who's been the starting quarterback for the San Diego Chargers the past 9 years. He's been a franchise quarterback, at times a borderline elite quarterback, but as a result, the Chargers have just a couple of playoff wins, no appearances in the Super Bowl, and even with a guy like Rivers, you're talking about a team that finished 9-7. You know, how much better are they really going to get with Philip Rivers, and would they really be that much worse off if they didn't have Philip Rivers? I get it and I understand it. But at the end of the day, I'm not surprised to see that Rivers is at least in San Diego for the time being, and that the Chargers weren't able to make a move or didn't make a move up to number two to go get a guy like Mariota. I just didn't think it was something that sounded all that feasible. I just didn't think it was something that made sense for either the Chargers or the Titans, frankly. So, I'm not surprised that it ultimately didn't happen. So now when we got to the actual matter at hand, and it came to the 2015 NFL Draft, I think most people knew one thing for certain, is that the Chargers were going to address running back at some point in time, and most likely were going to do it in round number one. The board was going to set up that way, and it just was going to make sense. You're talking about a team that was going to lose Ryan Matthews in free agency. Philip Rivers is still there, so you got to help him. It's not that surprising. Most people thought, and rightfully and justifiably so. Now, was it going to be Todd Gurley? Was it going to be Melvin Gordon? It was hard to really know, but with where the Chargers were originally sitting at 17, most people assumed that at least one, if not both of those running backs was going to be there for the San Diego Chargers. And ultimately, it kind of worked out that way. The Chargers traded up from 17 to number 15 to ensure that once Gurley went number 10 to the Rams, that they didn't lose out on the other guy that they apparently viewed as a first-round running back, and that was Melvin Gordon out of Wisconsin. They needed a running back. He was sitting there close enough where they could go get him, and they went and got him. Now, I understand some Chargers fans in particular question why they would trade up from 17 to 15 to go get a guy like Gordon, because maybe they didn't view the 49ers as a legit fit for Gordon. They didn't view the Texans at 16 as a legit fit for Gordon. Maybe they sit there and say the Chargers should have done better research knowing that the Texans wanted Kevin Johnson and that the 49ers were stuck on Eric Armstead. And I understand that. But there's also that fear of knowing that other teams could potentially be looking to trade up to get a guy like Melvin Gordon as well. And when that player that you've targeted is that close to you, sometimes that impatience can get the best of you, but sometimes that impatience pays off because it forces you to make the move to ensure that you get your guy. Look, at the end of the day, if you get your guy, you get your guy, period. It's that simple. And I'll give you a perfect scenario. Let's just say you go in the Wayback Machine to 1998. And Randy Moss is dropping down the board, and you're the Minnesota Vikings, and you're sitting there, I think it was with the 21st pick, if my memory serves me correctly. And you see Moss at 18 or 19. But you sit there and are concerned that maybe somebody will take a gamble on this kid, and you might not end up with him. But you know what Moss could be for you and what he could be at the NFL level. Are you going to give a shit if you gave up a couple of day 3 picks to move up in order to go get the guy? No. Within a year, everybody's going to forget about that. And nobody's going to fucking talk about that. If he's your guy and he's that close and it's not going to cost you that much, then you have to do what you have to do. And that's what the Chargers, I think, felt. And I understand why the Chargers did it. Now, did they have to? Maybe they didn't. But they did it. And again, I understand why they did it when you look at it from that perspective. Now, did they necessarily need to do it because of the strength and depth of this running back class? Perhaps not. But if Melvin Gordon was their guy and they felt he was the best fit and they felt he could be that type of LT type of impact back for them in their offense, then that's what they needed to do. Now, in terms of the rest of this draft, I think after that, a lot of people assumed that they were going to focus some of their energies on the defensive side of the ball or maybe on the offensive line. But they primarily spent the rest of this draft after Melvin Gordon focusing on the defensive side of the ball with Denzel Perryman and Craig Mager, Kyle Emanuel, Darius Philon. The rest of their picks, they only had 5 of them, in part because of the move up for Melvin Gordon. They were all spent on the defensive side of the ball, which makes sense. Now, in terms of the best pick for the Chargers here, it might be easy to say Melvin Gordon, but I actually think it could be Denzel Perryman, and here's why. You're talking about putting him in that linebacking core next to potentially Monte Teo on the inside. I think this is a guy that fits well in a 3-4 at the inside backer position. It's a bit of a weakness for the Chargers is that up the middle defense, and that's something Perryman, a bit undersized, but I think he is a thumper, and he's a guy that can play inside of the 3-4 at the NFL level. I think he's the guy that could end up being the best pure pick in terms of the position, in terms of the value, whereas Melvin Gordon was there at number 15. And I didn't think he was the second best or even third best running back in the 2015 NFL draft. A guy that could surprise might be the edge rusher Emanuel from North Dakota. Yes, he played at a lower level of competition, but this is a guy with the athleticism and the explosiveness that I think could translate to the NFL level. And initially he'll probably be asked to be a special team stud and be a guy that comes in at times, maybe along with an Ataushu in a rotation at the edge rush position. But I think he's a guy that could surprise some people potentially. Now, there are some things I do second guess about this Chargers draft. I don't think this was a bang-up class. In a lot of ways, I really look at this as a 2-pick draft for them. In a lot of ways, I do. They got no offensive line help at all for Philip Rivers, which I thought was a mistake. Center is in need. The interior of that line is in need. Frankly, I think the left tackle is still a need for them. They also didn't address wide receiver. I don't know why they don't like to address wide receiver. You were in a position to be able to potentially address wide receiver multiple times in this draft, another really good draft class at that position, and you failed to do so. As long as Philip Rivers is there, your success as an organization is going to hinge upon him. And if it's going to hinge upon him, you would think you'd want to make him as potentially successful as possible. And to do that, you got to give him more help than what he's got, especially at the wide receiver position. You just do. I also second guess taking Gordon at 15. Again, this was a really good running back class. I don't have a problem with taking a running back in the first round if it makes sense. I just don't think it makes sense with Melvin Gordon because, again, I don't think he was that good of a prospect. I don't think he was the second or even third best running back in this year's draft class. I just really don't. I question taking Mager in round number 3 out of Texas State. He's a guy with a lot of the tools, but he is nothing more than a tools pick at this point in time. Incredibly raw, and I thought there were, frankly, better defensive backs, more polished and ready defensive backs on the board at this point in time. So for the Chargers, I'm not that blown away with their draft, to be honest with you. I really liked their draft a lot better last year with guys like Ataushu in the second round, and yes, even Jason Barrett in round number 1. This was a C minus draft to me for the San Diego Chargers. They got their guy in Melvin Gordon, and I do like the pick of Denzel Perryman, but I also wouldn't be surprised, even though I think Kyle Emanuel could surprise a little bit. This pretty much is going to be a 2-player draft, in my opinion, and that's just not good enough. And I'm just not sure that Melvin Gordon is going to justify the first-round pick investment. This is a team that had LT all that time, and then they traded up, made that big move up several years ago to go get a guy like Ryan Matthews, and that never really panned out. Now you're going back to the well again with a Melvin Gordon, a running back who has fumbling issues, that's not particularly good catching the ball out of the backfield, and not as explosive as people want to make him out to be. It's not the best effort for the San Diego Chargers, in my opinion.